Hello, hi, it's me again, Erxandale. You can call me Alex. In this video, I'm gonna show you on how to use Trapcode form, which is like particular, except it's more of like a net of particles rather than it being emitted from one point. So what I mean by this is it doesn't fade away; it stays where it is. It's on like some type of grid, and all particles are connected to each other. So I'll show you how all of that works in this video. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do, as always, is create a new solid and name it to whatever you want. I'm going to name mine form. Going to the effects and presets panel and typing in form. And wherever you see RG Trapcode, which is over here, I will drop in form. Now, there are also other effects. I forgot to mention in the Trapcode suite. There is 3D stroke, echo space, form, horizon, lux, mirror, particular shine, and all of these are they're all unique in their own way. Some of them aren't really effects, but if you want, I can get to all of these and explain to them and probably make like a whole tutorial series on how everything works. So to set up form, you get your solid, get form, apply it in the solid. Make sure you have the Trapcode plugin installed, or else it won't be appearing on this thing. And you're going to be you're gonna have these settings over here in the properties tab, the effect controls. And if you use particular before, you realize that some of the drop down menus are different, but some parts also somewhat look the same, like it has a designer instead of systems, it says forms. And I will explain everything, but as always, we're going to start from the designer, and we're going to open the designer. And you can see that we have a bunch more settings here, but the concepts in particular are almost the same. Just have to understand, like, some parts of it. All right, so first we have the type, right? What type is your particles? Do you want to, I'm going to use the camera, switch the camera icon so I can spin around. What kind of particles do we have? Box grid, box strings, which turns your particles into strings. This is also heavier, by the way. A sphere, which is a cool one. And OBJ, where you can put a 3D model. So I can have a cone, 3D model cone. This is particles, or a text. So you can have a text and apply the text and do whatever cool stuff you can. Right. Now since you have this grid thing, and if I click play, the particles aren't moving anywhere. It's actually staying as a grid, right? So that's what I meant when it says like a net of particles, and however it behaves, the particles are always going to be somewhat connected to each other. Right, so now we have size, X and Y. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now if you want to have more control over the size, you can go to size, X, Y, Z, individual, and you can edit, all the different axes individually. So, the Z axis if you want it to be like a little more close to each other, Y if you want it to be like taller, and X, you get the idea. Same with the particles. So I'm going to increase the size up a bit. You could see that, there is I can change the number of particles too. So increase it on the X axis, increase it on the Y axis. For the Z axis, it acts like layers. So I can do that. But as always, more particles means more render time, more processing power, and all of that stuff. And yeah, you also have your rotation over here and your position, which is pretty self-explanatory. You could change the position and you could change the rotation, yada yada yada. All of these other settings are dependent on your base form type. If I have strings, for example, I can edit. I can change the string density and all of that stuff, and size random, distribution, taper size, all of that cool stuff. Now, if you don't know what taper is, it basically gets it makes the end smaller, right? So let's say you get a 3D object, you get like, let's say a string, and you want the end of the string to become pointy. That's what taper is. Alright, so next is the particle type. Pretty self-explanatory. like in particular, you could change the amount of particle types there is. Now, if you haven't seen the particular video, I do recommend watching it, it'll be easier to understand of how form works, because I'm going to be rushing through this video, this one a bit more. So these are like, you can change it into sprites, cloudlets, streaks, squares, whatever you like. That is what it is. Change how the particles look like, change the particle feather. All of these really depend on the particle that you choose. So I have sprites. You can also use an animated sprite. So for example, if I have a video of let's say a star spinning, I can make that into a particle effect. Size and rotation is the same thing. Now what's different is you can also have this size random, just changes the size randomly for each particle. Okay, so what's different here is when it comes to the size and rotation, it's not exactly size by life, it's more like by the axis. So for an example, on the x-axis, which is left and right, you could see that the particles are actually being faded depending on the location. I could change this to the y-axis, top and bottom, be the z-axis too, where the front and back is getting faded away, and finally, which is radial, which is more like a ball kind of effect. So it'll be like a force field kind of thing. So if I go here, you can see it's being faded as it is getting towards the end. That is what curves do for the size and rotation. Opacity is the same thing. You can have it change opacity random. You can have a faded opacity instead of having it by size. All of those different effects stuff. Next is color. Now this is another interesting one, because color in Trapcode particular is by life, while this one is by size and by its location. So you can have it on the x-axis, the y-axis, the z-axis, and radial. So you can get like a lot of cool effects with this and all that awesome stuff. Next is Shadowlets and shadow outlets, like in particular adds a shadow. Now you want to be careful when you're using this, because the shadow sometimes is a bit really harsh, right? But you could tell, it looks like a 3D object. But sometimes the shadows are too realistic, are too dark to be, to look like that. But just want to say that when you're using drop shadow or the shadowlet, you want to mess around with these settings and make sure they don't look as distracting as possible. But this is good, because when you have, like, let's say like an OBJ or something like that, and it'll be hard to see which part is in front and which part is back. Next is Disperse. Now Disperse is something that you won't find in particular, but basically what this does is it scatters particles around. So let's say if you want to make like a Thanos kind of effect of like someone being disintegrated, this is the effect that you could use. You can use just to, like, disintegrate objects or make some other cool stuff like that. Next is you have Twist, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It twists the particles. You could create some really cool effects like this and make some weird tunnel stuff, whatever. I've rarely used this, but it's a really cool but yet specific effect. Yeah, there's nothing else that I can explain towards it. It just twists the thing. Now next you have Fluid. Now, like particular, this pretty much does the same thing, except it adds fluidity to your particles. Now when you're doing fluid effects, fluid simulations in Trapcode, I recommend doing it in the form rather than particular, depending on what you're going for, because form shows a better representation of how form works. Now to show like when you're doing fluid effects, I recommend using the sphere, because it has like a better shape when it comes to having fluidity if that makes sense. I'm going to change the position down so I can see what's happening. So this is what I mean. You can see the fluidity here, the fluid, much easier. It looks like a mushroom cloud if you see it here. And you can also change the strength of the fluid. You can make it go downward, you can make it go up. Click play, it's just really slow, or I can make it really fast, really strong, like a poof right there. But if you think that this is a bit too formal, like it just looks like a mushroom cloud, that's where random scale comes in. Changes to like 25, for example, and now it's scattered out a bit. Could change the swirl scale and make it a bit more, even more scattered, have a bit more variety. I will leave the color like this for now because I think it looks cool. Next we have in our fluid force, you got vortex ring, which is like, it basically gives you, if I rotate the camera, you could see that it's being pushed by a ring or a tube of sort. So you could see that it's being pushed instead of like a box where the whole box field is pushing it up. This is a tube. So yeah, another way of having some interesting fluid. And last one is vortex tube, and basically what this does is it basically spins the particles around. Also got all the other properties here: core strength, core size. You could tilt it and everything. A lot of interesting stuff here. Now in the other video I also explained what viscosity and fluid time factor is. If you don't know what it is, time factor basically is the time scale of the animation, and viscosity is how fluid the particles are. Next we have fractal field, and this is one of the more used effects. Fractal field is like turbulence, except it's just not instead of it being displaced on position, the whole thing is just being displaced, the whole position as being displaced and all of that stuff. You can affect the size and opacity, which is cool. It's randomized. Now when it comes to your properties over here, this is much easier to explain compared to particular. So this is my fractal field. Let's say I want to change it up a bit. You could change the phase of the z-axis, the y-axis, the x-axis. Let's say I want it to move a bit more. Flow evolution, increasing the flow evolution will make it move a bit more. Making it less will make it, barely move at all. You can also have offset evolution, which is cool, and this is going to add change the fractal type over time. So instead of having it to have it move at a constant rate, you can do like a lot of cool stuff. You can make like some weird water effect kind of thing. Flow loop and loop time is something you might want to mess with if you want to have like a looped particle animation, because you could see here, how the hell will it loop this? This is where this comes in. I think it sort of calculates and it properly loops the thing, and if you tick this, it's going to give you a different thing. Next you have is all of these values right here. I have not messed with these much. Mess with these, and if what this is doing is basically the way it's getting displaced is it's using noise. Now if you don't know what noise is, it's just like it's a black and white texture map, light and dark values to push and pull detail up and down. I'm gonna tell the computer to push anything with black levels downwards and white levels upward, right? I have a video actually have a video where I use Stardust, and it basically shows of how that displacement works. Next you have the spherical fields. Now you realize, unlike particular, you actually have two spherical fields. So you can have one spherical field here, change the radius, change the scale. You can also change the x and y axis and everything like that, which is cool. You can change the rotation and all that cool stuff, and you can also change the position, which is another cool thing, and feather. So you could do that, and then you can add another spherical field. This is something for a bit more specific and abstract effects. I also did not find I don't see myself using this, But yeah, you can create some interesting effects with this. Now Kaleidospace is a mirror, so to give a better idea, I'm gonna switch the fractal field on again. Right? This is our fractal field. Kaleidospace is basically giving it a kaleidoscope mirror to mirror it. So let's say I switch this on, horizontal. Now you can see if I click play, it's mirrored in the middle. Yet it's, you know, it's still 3D, it's still particles, it's just mirrored. You can do the same with the vertical axes and both axes. So you can make some really cool, weird abstract effects and stuff. You can also, you got mirror everything, which is very a bit more trippy and a bit more powerful, because not only is it mirroring it, but it's also like sort of duplicating the particles. But yeah, you could do like a lot of interesting stuff with this effect. I'm gonna switch this off now. Next is your world transform. Transform is basically the overall transformation, scale, and position of where your particles are being placed at. So this is where you can, this is where your particles will be placed. They also have presets that you can also use, which is really cool. Also forgot to mention in the other video that I had was there's this thing called blocks on top, particulate, the same thing. So if I can actually choose like between like what the type of physics I have, or the type of shadows and the type of graphs and the presets over here. So if you know, let's say you want to make something and you don't want to just manually always put the settings in, this is what this is for. You always have all of these ready for you, and you know, and you can also change the settings of everything. So you know, I can change it to whatever I want it to look like. Now when you're working in form, there are some effects that might be a bit more specific, like that you're looking for, that you cannot find in the designer, and this is why this would be like really useful. So as always, some of the settings here are the same. However, some of the settings here are the same as the designer. However, some effects you cannot achieve in the designer. So one of them would be like the layer maps, which I'll get to. Let me show you an effect that I use a lot. So I'm gonna get this to individual. I'm gonna get this to 1920 by 1080. I'm gonna change the particle size on Z to 1. I'm gonna increase the number of particles. Particle size 3. And then I can go size random, put it 0. Alright, so now I have this white giant grid of particles blasting on my face, right? So let's say this is what I want to be projected on my particle effects. So I can go over here, make sure I have this unseen, go to color and alpha, and this is gonna change the color of the particles. You change it to whatever layer you want it, make sure it's the size that you want, and RGBA, which means RGB to RGB alpha to RGB alpha, map over X and Y, the top, the Y-axis and Z-axis. This is important to know on where it's being projected. Right? Now you can see that I have this interesting holographic effect kind of thing. And if I create a camera right now, you can actually see that this is a 3D effect. So yeah. And you can also displace it on the layer that you're using. Now I recommend making a black and white version, so it uses black and white information to displace it. But basically what this does is, for example, I put this to X and Y, change the layer to Eurocamp right here, and you could see it's being displaced depending on the color data. Whatever is darker is being pushed back, and whatever is light is being pushed front, or the other way around. And you can like invert the map, do all that cool stuff. So you can make some interesting effects like this. That's one of the reasons why I like using form, because you can do stuff like this. You can edit the rotation and all of that stuff. Now another tab that's here is audio react. Now this is what this does is basically you can use this to make an audio spectrum kind of effect. So let's say you have a fractal field, for example, right? Mapped to, let's say, fractal, and it gets displaced. I'm not gonna show you on how to do it, because I don't know how to use it, because I use Trapcode sound keys, which comes with Trapcode, which allows you to make anything react to audio, like anything in After Effects. For example, let's say I have this fractal field, I displace it, right? And let's say whenever there's a bass or there's a beat, the fractal field will increase. You know, that is what audio react would be used for. Disperse and twist is in the same tab over here. It's pretty self-explanatory. I've said on how it can disperse. Also forgot to mention that you can actually disperse it on depending on which axis. So z-axis, increase it, which means it's being pushed back and all of that stuff, or y-axis, so it's up and down, and you can really just mess with these and see what kind of effect you can get. They also have, you know, their global fluid controls, visibility, which is like fog. If you don't know what fog is, it can basically fade the background and the foreground and give you like a more like atmospheric look. And rendering is same thing. You can use your you can make it use your CPU or GPU, and you can if you have a graphics card, you know, you could go ahead and use your GPU, and you also have all of these other settings that you might need. If you want to know what DOF means, DOF smooth, all of that stuff, DOF means depth of field, which means it can be used on a camera and have depth of field. So to give an example, because I didn't show this earlier, but this is how depth of field works, right? So you could see that everything is in focus. There's no blur or anything like that. I create this camera right here, camera options, switched on depth of field. I change my aperture, and I change my thing. Now if I increase the blur levels, you could see how this part is in focus, this part over here is blurred, and this part over here is blurred. I can change the focus distance right here, make it more near me, 1500, or let's say 2000 or 1007. Just mess with these, and then you can get like a really interesting camera blur. You could see how it's being blurred in the background and the foreground's being focused. Now this works with any Trapcode effect that you use. Form, particular mirror, and tau, or DAO, however it's pronounced. But yeah, that is how the camera works. So yeah, I feel like I may have rushed this tutorial a bit, but that's because I actually do recommend that you watch the particular one first, because that one's it's a bit slower and it's more in depth to explain of how everything works. But form is pretty much similar to particular. It just works differently, and it can give you different results and all of that stuff. So yeah, if you like this video, leave a like. If not, don't leave a like. Yeah, I'm gonna go now. Goodbye.